Welcome to the show. I'm Billy Hallowell, and I'm filling in today for Mike Slater. Now, I want to start the show today by talking about a subject that I know has been on all of our minds because we're seeing it constantly in the press. We're talking about it, and that topic is law enforcement, cops, the people who are tasked with protecting us. Now, since this whole George Floyd scenario, which has been completely tragic, there have been so many questions, right, about race, about power, about police brutality, how police are trained. And it's really interesting because I think at the core of this, we have a bigger question, and that's how do we move forward? We want justice, we want safety, we want equality. And there's a list of things that we all deeply want, right? And people are taking to the streets, they're asking for these things. There's some interesting conversations happening. And the majority of the protests have been peaceful, right? But it's no secret that we've also seen some chaos. There's been a fair amount of it. In fact, we've seen toppling over of statues. We've seen destruction of public property, anger and hatred and frustration, and then these weird swaths of people trying to take over various areas of land and claim that it's their own little nation. But the thing that has really been tragic is sort of this negativity directed at police officers, right? The calling for changes in law enforcement, and some of that is fine. Claiming that we want to either replace or defund or reimagine what law enforcement looks like in the US. And the unfortunate part is that police officers are feeling the brunt of these reactions, right? And this is not an easy job. Being a cop is not easy. And we're seeing all sorts of quotes come out from union heads and police officers, openly saying that police personnel feel like they're being abandoned, like people are not supporting them. And there was one quote, it went as follows: "There is no one supporting the police, from the governor to the mayor to the DAs to the city council." And I've got a friend, I was just talking to a cop. He told me that in his 20 years working as a police officer, he has never been more mistreated, more disrespected, more spit on than he has been in the last few weeks. I mean, that is just incredibly unfortunate. And I want to stop for a minute and I want to say that the George Floyd situation should rock us to our core. It was absolutely horrific. And I think what we have to grapple with is that this wasn't the first time. We've had these incidents that have unfolded again and again, but we throw common sense out the window when we start to assume that every police officer, based on the actions of a few, is somehow diabolical, adversarial, coming after us, right? At the end of the day, do we need reform? Sure. I mean, technology changes, society changes. Government structures are not known for being nimble or easily changing with the tides, right? They're often more likely to become fossilized giants than anything else. And so I think it's great that we're going to pause and say, how can we help police officers more appropriately do their jobs, right? I mean, cops have a lot of power, and I think this is an important fact that we need to point out. And with great power comes great responsibility. Now, I say all of this knowing that the vast majority of men and women in uniform, they are doing difficult and transformative work. They're working in difficult, tough communities around the country. And it's just unfortunate to me, right, that we have this toxic sort of obsession with railing against the police. We're screaming at cops. There's people out there demanding that they get fired and just associating every police officer with every bad thing that's ever happened in law enforcement. At the end of the day, that is unhealthy, right? We need police officers. We need good police officers and law and order. And, you know, we've all sat through hours of this, conversations with friends and family and media. So I can go on and on. And that's not really what I want to do in this segment. What I want to do is look at the fact that, yes, we want justice, but we also want fairness and we want the full picture. And so I want to look at some of the heroes out there, right? These are the cops that are defying the stereotypes that we have right now. And these are men and women in uniform who go out of their way. They go above and beyond the call of duty. They are unafraid. They're willing to jump into action when the chips are down, when things are difficult, when they've got something to lose. And sometimes that something is their life. Or maybe it's just cops who are doing good things. They're doing kind and noble things in the community. Now, I've covered a lot of stories over the years, and there is one that just stands out. It involves this New Mexico police officer named Ryan Holitz. Now, Ryan was called into action for a situation that ended up being a false alarm. And so he's leaving the scene one day, and he notices this homeless couple, and they're sitting out in the grass, and they're doing drugs. So he goes up to approach them, and as he's walking up to the couple, he puts his camera on, his body cam, and he notices that the woman is 8 months pregnant. And the entire thing in that moment just leaves him in total shock. So he approaches the woman and he says to her, "What are you doing?" He starts questioning her. He's like, "Listen, you could kill your baby with these drugs. What are you doing?" And in those moments, it's really interesting because after, when he was interviewed, he said he felt this voice prompting him to do something almost unthinkable to me when I ponder it. He offered on the spot in that moment to adopt her unborn baby. I mean, it seems crazy, but then he and his wife actually did. They adopted baby Hope. And the rest of the story is history, right? They're on the record saying they felt God calling them to help this couple. And I don't care what you think about faith or any of those elements. At the end of the day, Holitz and his wife are nothing short of heroes, right? I mean, it's amazing. And he's not alone. There are so many other stories of cops around the country who have gone above and beyond to do amazing and selfless things. I encountered this other story, Officer Daniel Bologna, who he dove into frigid waters back in January. And this was a situation where a woman was basically in danger of drowning. And so later on, he's interviewed about this heroic act. And he said something. I just want to give the quote because it's so amazing. He said, "I knew somebody had to go in. There was no other option." I mean, this is the selflessness, right? That every single day, police officers, people who leave their wives, their husbands, their kids, and they go into the abyss of uncertainty every day. This is the kind of stuff that they're doing. There are two Milwaukee police officers, Nicholas Schley and Nicholas Reed, and they had a different kind of circumstance. They saw this car, burst into flames. And in this case, they jumped into action. You've got a car on fire, three teenagers inside. They go in, they pull these teenagers out. And after the story broke, they were given praise. And what was interesting is that Reed said something that I think really rings true today, particularly as we grapple with police misconduct and all the points that are being made. Police are being put into a negative light. He said, quote, "Officers all over the states, all over the United States, they do stuff like this every day that isn't recognized. Their stories aren't told." And I mean, that is so true. These are stories that we don't get to hear very often. And yet they're the experiences of brave cops who go out of their way every day to live up to the call of duty. And yeah, I don't want to deny the fact. We can't deny it. There are bad apples. There are bad cops who do selfish and deadly crimes, right? Just like any other field, there are bad ones. And we've got to note that. But we also have to note that those failures are not indicative of the majority of police officers, right? And I think a simple Google search, I mean, you'll see cops who have stopped mass shootings, cops who have saved children, who have helped men and women. I mean, the list goes on. One of the other stories I think of is this amazing woman. Her name is Myra Smith, and she was a cop at 9/11. She lost her life during the 9/11 attacks, and she was rushing in, helping hundreds of people flee out of the South Tower. And as she was doing that, the South Tower collapsed, and it was just this horrible story. But the amazing part of Smith's life were all the things that people said about her afterward. I mean, you had these incredible stories about her character as a police officer, as a person. One person came out and said she was just a compassionate person, that there was no stopping her. She would have gone in no matter what. Nothing could have stopped her from running into that building and saving those people's lives. Her husband, Jim, who was also a police officer at the time, he spoke out and he said this again is just part of her character. I'm not sharing these stories to erase what has happened. I'm sharing these stories because life is complex, right? And cops, most cops, are good and noble people, and we have to be fair. I want justice. I want a system that is fair to everyone, but I also want to be sure that we're remembering that these people, these men and women in uniform, that they operate in goodwill and care, and that they're out there in their communities each and every day doing things that we might not hear about. Now, coming up, we're actually going to be talking with a police officer, Tyler Beddoes. He's a current cop. He's also the author of the book, Proof of Angels. We will be right back. Welcome back to the show. I am joined today by Tyler Beddoes. He's an author and a police officer. How are you doing today, Tyler?
Good, Billy. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Well, we are also co-authors. We wrote a book together, and we've been friends for a while now. We connected over a story that happened in 2015, and it involved you responding to a call. And this is the incredible basis of your book, Proof of Angels. So I wanna talk through that story because we're talking about sort of amazing things that police officers have done, and your story certainly falls into that category. So set up the events for me of the morning. This is a Saturday morning in 2015. I believe it was in the winter. What happened? How did the call come in? Start just taking us through some of those events.
Yeah, it was spring of 2015, so about 5 years ago now. It's something that's still so fresh and so needed, I guess. But it was a time I was going through a lot in my life at this point in time. There was a lot of, kind of like I say, similar to today, a lot of negative press towards police. There was a lot of stuff in my personal life that was, with some heartache that I've experienced on the job, to where I was just kind of down. I was just kind of losing faith in things. And this was a spring morning, Saturday morning. We got dispatched to a car that was upside down in a river in the town I was in. And they said, "Hey, the car's upside down. We think someone might be in the car, but we're not sure." And so we got there. There was 4 male officers that got there. The car was super smashed. It was upside down. There was a river flowing through the car. But as we were getting down to the car, we heard a female voice that said, "Help me, help me." And there were just the four males around. That was it.
So let me pause you there. So you arrive at this scene. The car is overturned. What was the temperature like at that point? Was it still cold?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was chilly. It was starting warm. The water was freezing, but it was a fairly cold morning, I guess you could say. About 11 a.m.
So I want to get to that. I want to get to that voice. But when you arrived there and you saw the car, what were you thinking as a police officer, as a first responder, about if there was anybody inside? What were you sort of thinking? Did you think they had a good chance? Did they not have a good chance? Just take us through some of your mindset in those moments.
And that was the hard part. When we got there, the car was so smashed. I mean, it was just completely smashed. River, flowing through the entire car. So to us, there's no way someone's, going to survive this crash. And we were making our way down the riverbank. And like I said, there's 4 officers, and we all heard a female voice that said, "Help me, help me." And so at that moment, it was like, okay, someone's alive in this car. We've got to get in this car. We worked down the riverbank. We got in the river. We were able to push the car up on its side. I don't know how we did that at the time, but we were able to push the car onto its side. And inside, we saw a young infant that was strapped in a car seat.
So you heard the voice, you all at the same time. Did you guys communicate about this voice? Did you say to each other, "Oh gosh, you hear that, let's go"? Was it something where you all just kind of heard it and you walked towards it, and you went towards it?
Reacted to it. To us at the time, it was someone in that car saying, "Help me, help me." So we thought, okay, someone's alive in this car. And it wasn't until you flip the car, there's a young 18-month-old girl, baby Lily, that was in the car. We were able to free her and get her out. And the mother we saw had been deceased for hours. She had died on impact, which we found was 18 hours earlier. And so it is so bizarre.
So she had been dead for almost a day, but you all clearly heard this voice. And I remember, by the way, because I was covering this story, I remember watching you and the other officers the day of this event when you found the car. I remember the local press showed up, they're interviewing you guys. And it struck me that you're all mentioning hearing this voice that very clearly said, "Help me, help me." And this didn't sound like a child's voice to you in any way.
No, not at all. In fact, they said the child wasn't even speaking at that time. In general, she didn't talk at that time. So to us, that was the only, it was after the fact that baby Lily survived, by the way, made a full recovery, which was a miracle in and of itself. She was 18 hours in freezing cold, upside down temperatures. We actually, when we turned the car, we actually flipped her underwater for 3 or 4 minutes, just in and of itself, not knowing she was in there. And so when she survives this, no side effects at all. So we look back at this, and it was just a pure miracle. And that's when we started thinking, okay, we were guided to that car, because there's just no explanation for it.
one of the things, because you'll often have people say, oh, they heard a voice or they made it up because they're trying to, get some sort of lucrative book deal or something. You guys were talking about this, and it's very rare that that happens. Police officers on the job saying, we heard this voice, we all heard it, and there were four of you who all heard it. Nobody has disputed that. You were all in the media talking about that. So you guys rescue baby Lily. She's okay now. And obviously she lost her mother, which is tragic, but there was no other source for this voice. So how did you process this at the time? You go home that night. I'm sure you're telling people. It was obviously a big news story. It made national news because of these elements. What did you think about that voice? Where did you think it came from?
It was tough for me at first. Like I said, I was in a super dark spot. I guess you could say, spiritually speaking. And if it had just been me that heard the voice, I'd be, I'm crazy. I don't know what that was. But when all four of us heard it, it was later that night, talking to my wife, talked to the other officers. Hey, did you guys hear this? Yes, it would. Yes, we heard it. You can hear us respond to it on the body camera. So to me, it was in that moment that I thought, okay, God guided us to this car. There was no other explanation. Baby Lily needed to be saved that day, and obviously it was something that just turned my faith completely around at that time, which was much needed.
Yeah, and it turned a lot of people's faith around. I mean, it was a story that gave people a lot of hope. You have this voice telling you to go towards this car. You find in the car, unfortunately, the mother's been deceased for almost a day, but you have this baby there who you rescued. Now, this became the basis of a book, and I want to talk about that. But you've mentioned here a couple of times you were in a dark place. You were struggling. There were some things on the job. And we're looking at kind of what's going on in the country right now. Being a cop is not an easy job. You are currently still a cop, right? What are some of the things? What are some of the things that are challenging? Like, take me through what it's like to be a cop. What are some of those challenges? And if you want to share some of what you were facing then, feel free. But I think just to help people who are not police officers understand the day-to-day, what it's like.
It's super tough. I mean, you got to think. I mean, obviously, I don't work in New York City where you're at. I don't work in some of these, big cities, but it's super, police work's kind of the same everywhere. And we deal with the same type of stuff in smaller volumes, of course, in certain areas. But to basically put on that uniform, it used to be a time where, 15 years ago when I started, it was seen as a heroic job. It was, public service. It was for the good, right? And today it seems like you throw on that uniform and we're portrayed as a villain, basically. And so to go from Superman, I guess, in a way, to the villain was kind of a shock. I mean, it was something I knew where my heart was always in it. Everyone that I talk to, the officers that I work with, I know where their heart's at, and so it's tough to know where you stand, and then to be portrayed in a lot of situations as the villain. It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, you're out there, and here we're telling a story about how you were able to help save this little baby. And my argument is I think a lot of people are not hearing those stories. We're hearing the George Floyd story, which we need to hear. We need to know what's going on. We need to right those wrongs when a situation happens. But the vast majority of police, by far, are doing amazing work, saving lives, helping people. And yet that narrative, I think, gets lost in this mix, right? What did you, and I just want to go back to baby Lily and that situation, because it is interesting. It happened in 2015. You had said there was a lot of negative press. I mean, obviously 2014 was the start of a lot of this negative press around police officers. So you were kind of having this event happen in the middle of that. And now we're 5 years later, we're still kind of having that same dynamic flare up again, maybe even worse. But what were some of the lessons you took away from that voice, from that circumstance, that maybe changed you as a person and as a police officer?
That changed, honestly, that moment changed everything for me as far as the way I viewed everything. My kids were young at that time. And so to see her recovery and see that, to me, it was like, okay, this is worth it. This is worth, working hard, whether people want to criticize you or not. Like I say, I know my heart's in the right place, and I'm going to go and do what I can do. And so to see that aspect of it just changed my approach to everything, my faith, my view of things. And so it is frustrating, like you say, as far as no one's more unhappy about this George Floyd than I am, as far as watching that was just, I couldn't watch it. It was brutal. It was not okay in any shape or form. It was disgusting, that part of that. But again, we can't villainize or categorize, 99% I would say are great officers and do the right thing. And so it's frustrating to get that 1% that really, we're shaped by, at least in this time. But I think for me, it's staying positive, trying to.
Yeah, well, I noticed something about your shirt right now. It seems like it says something about the president on there. I think I see his name. Okay, so let's talk about this because you're a police officer, and I know that you support Trump. When it comes to being a cop, what are some of the things that have kind of caused you to gravitate toward the president?
That's what's funny. Prior to, so like I told you earlier, 15 years in this job. I wasn't a huge political guy, and Trump comes along, and we didn't, President Obama, we didn't get a lot of support back then in the last 8 years, as far as vocal support, as far as, hey, we support our officers, we're standing with them. And when President Trump came along, this is something that he campaigned on. This was something that he continued to speak on at officers' funerals, calling their spouses. I had a friend in the Salt Lake area that was shot. He called their wife specifically and expressed his condolences for things. And so for me, from the very beginning, he followed through on everything and his support for police. So it's really stuck with me to have someone that's so vocal and so, such a great president to us as far as police officers, that I've really, loved to support him and what he's done.
Yeah, and he's been very vocal, supporting cops, right? As you've said. Now, you and I were talking yesterday, and one of the things I thought was interesting, I asked you how your community was reacting to you as a cop. And I know the difficulties that exist, but you actually shared some of the stories of positive things that were happening. And I wanted you to share that, maybe just some of the reactions that have given you sort of a heartwarming feel at a time when it's been very difficult for you.
Yeah, first when all this started, it was almost I don't know if embarrassing is the right word, but to throw on the uniform and go to work, it was kind of like, I didn't want to walk into the local gas station without, ducking and rolling with the uniform. But now we've got so much, our community is so good. And I think that silent majority of people, I think we hear the noise and we hear, some of the stuff the media feeds us at times it's not, I would say, accurate. And so for me to see a community that supports me, I've had, treats, cookies left on my porch. I've been stopped in town for, hey, here's a Starbucks gift card and things where, it was just
Wow.
the appreciation of the community. It's really, you've seen a lot of that lately.
Well, and we are at a time when we need hope, right? And so what I really want to kind of pivot toward is your book, because I think your book, Proof of Angels, is something that offers hope, and it appeals to the story and it tells the story that you've spoken about here on the show. But what can people take away from Proof of Angels? Talk to us a little bit about that, particularly in a time where, again, so many of us are just hungry for something hopeful and positive.
Yeah, it started out, it wasn't something that I wanted to do. And I had received emails and things from people all over saying, hey, this story changed my life. And so I started talking, and my co-author, Ptolemy Tompkins, he did a good job at really trying to help me. All right, what thoughts do I want? And what's funny about it is it's a book about angels or that experience, but it's kind of a book about police in America, really. It's got a lot of my police stories, very relevant to today, why I was in a dark place, and then kind of that end game of trying to get on the other side and the positive side of things. And so it really just offers a lot of, if you're in a dark place, there's light that's going to come from it. It may take some time, but it's going to work out. God's going to shine through, and there's going to be light on the other end. So that was the approach. Like I said, there's a lot of darkness in it just based on where I was at, but there is light for some of that hope that we needed. And I think, like you say, it's been 4 years since that book came out, but it's just as relevant today as it was then, at least for me.
Well, I mean, listen, we've got a lot of darkness and we need a lot of light right now. And so I would encourage people to check out that book. And Tyler, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Really appreciate it. Everyone else will be right back with more of the show. Hey, I'm Billy Hallowell, and welcome back to the show. We have got a lot more to talk about today, and we've already dove into a lot, right? We've talked about police reform, we've talked about all of the issues that are sort of raging in culture at the current moment, right? We've got the statue toppling, we've got a whole slew of topics that are dominating the headlines. But what's really interesting to me is that there's this one sleeper issue that I know is going to bubble back up to the surface anytime now, particularly before we get to the election. And that issue that I'm talking about is abortion, right? This is one of those topics that a lot of people don't want to talk about because it's complicated and it's a little uncomfortable. And really, it's without a doubt one of the most politically flammable issues imaginable. Everybody fights about it. And it's kind of fascinating because you've got these two rights, right? You've got the right of the mother, and then you've got the right to life of the children. And that's what people are fighting about. And what's so fascinating to me about this issue is that it's unique in a way. It sort of spans generations, right? With little sign of sort of slowing down in its potency. I mean, there are a lot of people out there, they assume, oh, the Supreme Court's going to settle whatever issue it is. And in this case, you've got a Supreme Court case that unfolded in 1973, right? That's the Roe versus Wade case. And that legalized abortion across America. And here we are. I mean, it's crazy. 50 years later, almost 50 years, and absolutely nothing has been settled. Nothing has really changed. The nation remains divided. You've got 42% of the country saying that, abortion is morally acceptable, and you've got 50% saying that it's wrong. And again, it's so crazy to me how heavily contested this is. But when you look at elections, 2016, for instance, you had Hillary Clinton and Trump facing off in that third presidential debate. And you may remember this moment. There was this battle over late-term abortion. And it was fascinating because it became a defining point in that election. Hillary did not back down from late-term abortion, and Trump really went all in, calling it horrific. And I think it impacted a lot of people. We're going to see these sorts of moments, I think, again, in 2020, because this is an issue that people care about. Now, for me, I've covered this issue for a very long time. And one of the things that really I struggle with is the cavalier nature that a lot of people have when they talk about abortion, right? We call it a procedure. We call the unborn baby a fetus. And some people can't even bring themselves to say that an unborn baby is alive, right? And that's the thing that gets me the most, because we're able to detect a heartbeat just a few weeks in. And so you have this question of saying, well, does a heartbeat indicate life? I mean, I think we know the answer to that. And so over time, I've actually become a one-issue voter. And I want to explain what I mean by that. That doesn't mean that I'm going to always vote for the pro-life candidate, but it does mean that I have some things I won't vote for. Okay, so let me explain. I will not vote for somebody who can't bring themselves to at least say that abortion is a tragedy, right? I mean, it's a sad thing. I don't care if you're pro-life or if you're pro-choice. I can't cast a ballot for a person who can't at least do that, who can't at least lament the loss of life, right? I mean, that seems like a low bar. It seems pretty simple. And again, whether you're pro-choice, pro-life, we should be able to have an honest conversation and say that this is a life and that there are some people you believe have the right to terminate that life. I can't really get on board with people who say it's moral to terminate that life. That's not a position that I think lines up with science and logic. But at the end of the day, you have a lot of people, they'll say, well, what about rape and incest and the life of the mother? And those are extenuating circumstances. I think the important thing in this debate to note is that the vast majority of abortions have nothing to do with that. That's not what we're arguing about. Those are tragic circumstances. What we're arguing about is the fact that almost 900,000 babies are aborted a year. I mean, that's 900,000 lives that will never be. That is what makes this such a politically flammable issue. And I'm not here to debate whether or not I think abortion should be legal. That's just not something I'm actually interested in doing. But I am here to talk about the morals and the values and the ethics. And I think, I'll be very clear, I think ending the life of an unborn baby is actually wrong, and that we shouldn't dance around and skirt and use different language like fetus and change the meaning of words. Because when we do that, we're actually just trying to make ourselves feel better about what's happening. It doesn't change at the end of the day the reality of what abortion is. It doesn't change what's actually happening. For me, one of the biggest turning points that actually made me this one-issue voter was the Kermit Gosnell trial. Now, I was sent to go cover this in the courtroom, and he was a Philadelphia abortion doctor. If you're not familiar with him, he was actually convicted in 2013 of murder. I think it was 3 counts of murder and 1 of involuntary manslaughter. And he was accused of snipping the spines of babies after they were born. People would call his clinic the House of Horrors, and it was very graphic. I'm not going to get into all of that, but something happened in me in that courtroom. I would sit there every day, and I would sit next to other journalists, and I would listen, and I would watch, and I would see the images for hours on end, and I would hear the heart wrenching stories of people who worked in that clinic and patients who had gone there, and I would just bounce between discomfort and actually being horrified by what I was seeing and hearing. It was just one of those experiences you don't forget. It gave me sort of a new insight on late term abortion in particular. And again, it made me a one issue voter. I remember sitting there, and Gosnell's attorney, he said something that stopped me in my tracks. He said, that abortion is violent, and he started going into it. He said the process itself is kind of rough, and then he started to describe it. And again, I won't get into it because it was graphic. But I left the courtroom that day, and I was really disturbed by it. I remember thinking what Gosnell had done was horrific, but I was realizing that in the end, there are abortion doctors all over the country who actually legally kill babies later on in pregnancy after viability, when the baby could survive outside of the womb. And those doctors, they follow protocol, they follow legal procedures. And it really just started to come down to this difference between the tactics that Gosnell had used. And again, I'm not defending the tactics, they were horrific, and the tactics that others use that are legal. In the end, it's the same end result, the loss of life, right? The loss of life later on in a pregnancy. And I started to look at the inconsistencies in the law, times when an unborn baby is counted as a life, and then times when an unborn baby isn't. And the Gosnell case, it got me thinking differently about abortion and about the fact that I think so many of us were a little apathetic, right, when it comes to abortion. We kind of look past it. We don't want to be those one issue voters. But at the end of the day, there are a few issues that actually directly impact life and death. You've got the death penalty and you've got abortion. I mean, those are really your 2 life or death policy issues, right? And moral issues that people will debate about. And so to me, it's crazy that we have places in the country with no restriction on late term abortions. We've got thousands of late term abortions that unfold every year. And I'm not saying I want every politician to be pro life, right? But I'm dumbfounded that people like Hillary Clinton and others can't bring themselves to at least say that abortion is a tragedy, that it's sad. I can't understand for the life of me why all of us are so comfortable with late term abortion. And I want to clarify what I mean by comfortable. I can't understand why we don't actually demand that politicians have some protections, right, for babies later on in pregnancy. I mean, what's so remarkable to me is that Americans actually agree with restrictions. If you look at the polling, it's really interesting. Only 33% of Americans believe that Roe versus Wade should be seen as allowing abortion at any point in a pregnancy without any restriction. And 7 in 10 Americans would actually limit abortion to the first 3 months of pregnancy. I mean, abortion, again, it's complex, but if I can't trust a politician to defend the most defenseless among us, what can I trust him or her with? I guess that's my key question. And so I'm going to be talking about that and some other related topics with Abby Johnson, a former Planned Parenthood clinic director who is now actually one of the most well-known pro-life advocates in America, when we come back. Welcome back to the show. I'm Billy Hallowell, and we're here today with Abby Johnson. She is a former Planned Parenthood clinic director who has become one of the nation's most well-known pro-life advocates. How you doing today, Abby?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for coming on. You and I have worked together on a bunch of projects over the years, and right now you're the subject of PureFlix's new series, which is called Beautiful Lives. And I'm excited to dive in with you. I want to get into your story for those who don't know it, but I want to actually start by asking you, looking ahead to 2020, right now there's a lot of other issues happening in culture. What role do you think abortion is going to play in this upcoming election?
Well, if you would have asked me that, 6 months ago, I would have said that it was going to be the key issue. Right now, I do think it's going to be one of the primary issues. The news cycle is constantly changing. So, right now we're waiting on the June medical decision back from the Supreme Court that could be coming back to us today. So, you never know, what's going to make the news cycle today or tomorrow, or we're a very fickle people. So abortion could be, top on the docket in a month from now, like it has been over the past year. So, but I do think that it's going to be one of the top three issues that people are going to be talking about, that our president is going to be talking about in the next election. It's something that the United States is definitely divided over. And I think that the abortion community, the abortion lobby, would like to really convince the American public that it's sort of settled, that the idea of abortion is already settled, that abortion is going to be codified into law for eternity, till the end of time. And I just don't think that that's true. And especially if Donald Trump wins this next election, we know that the Supreme Court, of course, is sort of up in the air. We expect to have, probably two more spots filled on the Supreme Court if he wins this next election. And so really Roe is hanging in the balance right now.
Well, and it's interesting. You mentioned it not being settled. I mean, the numbers show it's not settled. You've got, and I was sharing these earlier on, 42% saying that abortion is moral, but 50% saying it's not moral. I mean, nothing has really changed over the decades. If anything, the pro-life movement has actually made more traction and had more traction on this issue than the other side has. And one of the things that I know we've spoken about before, but a lot of people, when you say, oh, I'm a one-issue voter, or this is the issue that I vote on, people get frustrated by that. I mean, a lot of people will say, how could you be a one-issue voter? That's so wrong. How do you respond to that sort of critique?
Well, for me, I am a one-issue voter. And, people say to me, how can that be? There are so many other issues that must concern you. And that's true. There are many issues that concern me today. However, for me, the issue of abortion is really at the root of many issues that plague us today in our society. Abortion is the dehumanization of the most marginalized, the most innocent in our society. And so if we are willing to kill and destroy the most innocent among us, then it makes sense that we are willing to destroy others in the street, that we are willing to destroy those who are otherwise marginalized in other groups. And so for me, really the root cause of many of the ills in our society does come down to the dehumanization of the individual person. And there's no one more dehumanized in our society today than the unborn.
Well, and it's interesting hearing you say this. Now, for those who don't know, and I think most people do, there was a book and a movie. You wrote a book called Unplanned. There was a feature film about your life, also called Unplanned. And your story is fascinating. I mean, you worked for Planned Parenthood for years. So people coming in right now watching this, if they don't know that background, the things you're saying, it might seem crazy to them because they're like, wait, she worked for Planned Parenthood for all these years. But you had this dramatic moment. And we don't have a whole ton of time to dive into all of it, but you had a moment and you were there for about 8 years, correct? At Planned Parenthood?
That's correct. That's correct.
So you were there for 8 years.
Yeah, 8 years. And I was a clinic director there. And so, I've seen what abortion can do to the human person, and not just the child in the womb, but also I've seen what it does to the family unit. I have seen what it does to the woman who has an abortion. And so to say that abortion heals at all is a lie. Abortion destroys, it damages, and it hurts.
Now, and I know you've told this story, but I have to ask you because people are going to wonder, what is it that makes somebody go from being a director at a Planned Parenthood clinic to being a very famous, well-known pro-life advocate. I mean, it's a total 180 that you've done in your life. So can you take us through the things that made you finally say, "Oh my goodness, this is not what I should be doing," and to change your life so dramatically?
Yeah, so there were a few things that took place. One was that we were going to be opening the largest abortion facility in the Western Hemisphere, which is currently open and operating. We were going to be performing elective abortions, so abortions for any reason, through the 6 month of pregnancy. And for me, that was just too far. These are babies that are viable outside of the womb, babies that can live on their own. A lot of people, even people who support abortion, believe that abortion just doesn't happen that far along without some sort of medical reason or some dire circumstance that the woman, needs to have an abortion. And that's simply not true. Elective abortions are allowed through the 6 month of pregnancy in almost every state across our nation. That was sort of a line in the sand for me. And so that really caused me to say, what are we doing here? This isn't what I signed up for. But then we were also required to double our abortion quota, the number of abortions that we were required to sell at our facility. And I had really believed the talking point that we were to keep abortion safe, legal, and rare. And so if that was the case, then why were we trying to double our abortion quota? Why did we have an abortion quota to begin with? But ultimately, I ended up leaving the abortion industry after witnessing a live ultrasound-guided abortion procedure where I saw a 13-week-old baby on an ultrasound screen fight and struggle for his life against the abortion instruments. And I knew then that I had believed a lie, that I had then proclaimed a lie, that abortion did kill an innocent human being in the womb, that there was humanity there, that there was life there. And if those two things were true, then I knew that I was on the wrong side of this debate. And so I decided then that I would leave the abortion clinic and I would never participate in abortion again.
Now, just so people understand, obviously people know you as somebody who's out there, you're speaking, you're sharing, you're telling your story, but what did you lose to do that? I mean, walking away, just again, 8 years in one place, all your friends, I would imagine, a lot of the people you knew, this is where they were. When you walked away from that, what was that like for you? What did you lose?
Well, I lost a very lucrative income, definitely. Planned Parenthood it pays well for the destruction of innocent human life. And so I walked away from a very comfortable salary and really into the unknown, not knowing, what my next job was going to be, if I was going to have a job, what that was going to look like. Yes, I mean, definitely, my friends, my whole, network of friends and supporters was there. My faith community, we were Episcopalian, and our Episcopalian church was very supportive. The National Episcopalian Doctrine is very pro-choice. Our Episcopalian priest was supportive of my work at Planned Parenthood, would send girls to me so that I could help them get an abortion. When I became publicly pro-life, we were called in to the church, to his office, and were told that we were no longer welcome in the Episcopal Church of America. So we lost our faith community. We lost a lot, but we gained so much more. And it was hard to see in that moment because it felt like such a tremendous loss. But when you gain truth, really, you gain so much freedom.
And you've helped bring freedom to a lot of other people. I mean, let's talk about the fact that you've helped hundreds, and you would have the exact number of people try to leave or actually leave the abortion industry. So people who are working there, you're actively helping people transition out just like you did. And you're also helping young moms fill their registries. I mean, talk about some of this amazing work that you're doing.
Yeah, so about 8 years ago, I started a ministry called And Then There Were None. And I thought, there had to be other people like me, people who feel trapped inside of the abortion industry, who want to leave, and people say, well, can't they just leave? I mean, what's the big deal? It's a job. But working inside of the abortion clinic is not like working at McDonald's. It's very different. And, they will give you a poor recommendation if you quit your job there. They will blackball you out of the medical industry. They will give you, really a hard time if you decide to leave. And there's also really a spiritual component as well. I mean, there's definitely some spiritual warfare that comes when you're walking away from such great evil. And so we wanted to provide a support system for other clinic workers who wanted to leave. And to date, we're right at 600 abortion clinic workers who have left their jobs, who have found healing through our ministry. And ultimately, our goal is to help them find healing, but to also help them come into relationship with Jesus Christ. And so that's been really just people say, what's that like, to be on the phone with an abortion clinic worker as they're leaving their job for the, walking out for the last time. And I tell people it's like being on the phone and witnessing a miracle. And that's really what it feels like, because that's really what it is. And so we've been doing that, sitting right at 600 abortion clinic workers who have left. And because of that, because of those 600 workers that have left, we have helped to shut down 21 abortion facilities because of their testimonies, because of their work with state and local different agencies that have helped to close down those abortion facilities. So that's been really tremendous. And then in October of 2019, I started an organization called Pro-Love Ministries. And our goal is really to fill gaps in the pro-life movement. So we started a crisis line called Love Line. We currently are working with over 300 people, single moms, moms in crisis, dads, anyone who really needs help. We say in the pro-life movement that we're here to help those who choose life. And so we have an extensive network of pregnancy centers that are helping moms after they choose life, or, when they choose life. And generally, that help goes until the child is about 2 years old. But what about, after the child is 2 years old? And so we're helping those parents, who fall on hard times. Maybe their children are, 14 and 13 and 11, right? And they need some support. And so we're here to help them. And so Loveline is a crisis line. We're helping people all over the country. We're just sort of really booming since this COVID crisis has taken a hold of our country, but it's really been beautiful. We have many, many other projects. We're about to launch a project called Mama Scholar, which is a project that will help single moms complete their education through a scholarship program.
Wow.
We have a project called Love Beyond Borders, where we reach out to pregnancy centers all across the world and help them reach out to women in their communities who are in need. So, we just have many, many projects and affiliations that we're working with to really help fill those gaps in the pro-life movement.
Do you sleep at all, Abby? Because this sounds like an awful lot of work. This sounds like
it's a lot of work, but you know what? I have a fantastic team of people surrounding me, and there are 17 of us on our staff, and we're a small staff, but we're very mighty, and we work a lot. That's true, but we play hard, and God He really just supports us and really keeps us afloat.
Well, listen, Abby, I so appreciate that. And if people are interested in more, they can head over to watch Beautiful Lives over at pureflix.com/beautiful lives and see your story and the story of others who you've worked with and helped. And thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. Make sure you tune in tomorrow for another episode of the show.